Hello everyone, and welcome to my first episode of Balanced.Me. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Jessica, and I have been a vestibular patient since 2020, diagnosed with vestibular migraine and PPPD. And I created this podcast to not only spread awareness about these life-altering conditions, but to empower and support other vestibular patients. These conditions are not an easy thing to live with, and I feel the challenges that are faced with living dizzy every day, for the most part, go very overlooked or are deemed not very significant. There's not a great deal of research about vestibular disorders, particularly PPPD. It's common for people to have a very blasé attitude towards it, particularly because it is an invisible condition. I guess that would be because, if there's not a lot of awareness out there and people aren't educated in how debilitating it actually can be, it would be hard for people to, I guess, understand what others are going through, to really empathize with people. So I spent the first 2.5 years researching, learning, listening, living, and healing from my conditions. And while I believe my PPPD symptoms are for the most part controlled, I still experience vestibular migraine episodes occasionally, which can also then bring on temporary PPPD symptoms. So during my recovery period, I reached a point where I felt I had a clear grasp of what it took to recover, and I was really inspired. So I wanted to share my knowledge and experience, and that was when I created the Facebook support group PPPD Healing, Recovery and Support. And that group has grown immensely over the last 2 years. I think we have about 2.9 thousand members, and this number continues to grow every day. And it is such an amazing group. Our members are really supportive. We have people from all walks of life, in all different fields, with all different stories and experiences, and we all just come together to really help each other and provide support through these challenging life periods. And while I have supported and shared my knowledge throughout the group for the last couple of years, I haven't really talked about my recovery journey in depth and my experience, what's helped, the challenges that I faced, what worked, what didn't, pretty much how I went from being bedridden for months to where I am today. So this first episode, I want to share with you my experience and my recovery journey, and in later episodes I hope to touch on the other challenges faced with living with these conditions, such as anxiety, depression, chronic pain, as well as treatment plans, and I guess just general support. 3 years ago I was one of those people who really looked up to people who were on their way to recovery or who were recovered, and I really looked up to them for hope and inspiration, because it is such a debilitating condition and it takes you to a very dark place that it's very hard to get out of. So I guess I want to be able to be there for people who were in similar situations to what I was, to show them that, how you're living or what you're experiencing right now isn't permanent. It's only temporary. So I really hope that for any listeners out there, my podcast makes a difference for you. I hope you find it inspiring and empowering. And as I always say, I really hope you find balance. So before I continue to talk about my onset, I want to, I guess, touch on a little bit about my experience prior to my onset, because I believe it's very significant. I was going through chronic stress for a very long period, and I am talking 3-4 years of chronic stress. It was a very traumatic period for me. I was under a lot of emotional and mental pain. It was, even just talking about those times is very hard for me. I still get quite emotional when I reflect back to that. So I believe that what I was experiencing at the time had a huge contribution to my onset. So I was away for the weekend with my partner, and we were on a lovely scenic walk. Everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, I guess the only way I can describe it, it was like the whole world was closing in on me. And I had this really overwhelming fear of dread and fear. I don't know what it was. I was, I've always been a very happy-go-lucky person, always loved going away and being excited about going for walks. So at the time there was no stress. I can't necessarily put a reason to why it happened in that moment. It just occurred that way. And so this very overwhelming feeling of fear and dread, and I got so lightheaded I thought I was going to pass out. And it was a little bit of a walk back to the car. So I was really trying to get back to the car and just to sit down and have some water and to, see what was going on. Made it back to the car. And then once I sort of calmed down a little bit, it was fine. It kind of just went away. I felt a bit scared, naturally a natural response would be, okay, what the hell was that? But for the most part, I was okay, and it went away, and I went about my weekend away, gracefully, and I had fun. And then we were on the way home. So this was a few days later. We were driving home, and again, that instant feeling of overwhelming dread and fear just came about, and I felt a little bit lightheaded. I was sitting down in the car. So the experience wasn't the same as being out in the sun going for a walk. And it kind of stuck with me for a couple of minutes, and I was just like, okay. And then I was trying to stay calm, and I'm like, what is this? Trying to work it out. What is this? And then it just went away. And then sporadically for the next month and a half, maybe, those moments of lightheadedness and dread kind of just popped up, but they didn't hang around. It sort of just came and then it went after a couple of minutes, and until one day it came and it stayed. It didn't go away, and I saw, naturally, I didn't know what was happening to me. So, I went to my doctor, who said, it's BPPV, and he tried the Epley maneuver on me. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to get you to see a neurologist. So I saw a neurologist, and he was adamant that it was BPPV, and he did an Epley maneuver on me, and he sent me to a physical therapist. And the physical therapist that I was referred to had no idea about dizziness vestibular issues and dizziness, I felt like I was teaching him, to be honest. But he even, did the Epley maneuver on me after he sort of researched it a bit, and then I came back to another appointment, and, so anyway, these people were very adamant that I had BPPV. I had 3 or 4 Epley maneuvers done on me, and I was still constantly dizzy, constantly. And I didn't know what was going on. I go to these professionals looking for help and support, and I just felt like they had no answers for me at all. So, at that point, I was spending a lot of time in bed because, it was so debilitating. I couldn't function. So the only place I ever really got relief from my sensations and symptoms was when I was lying down. So I did spend a lot of time in bed, and it wasn't until I was describing to my sister what I was experiencing, and she was telling me that she had recently had similar experiences and was diagnosed with vestibular migraine. So for me, that was, I guess, the starting point. I was spending a lot of time in bed. So what was I doing? I was researching naturally, So I was on Google, I was looking up vestibular migraine. It took me down the rabbit hole to all these other vestibular disorders, and I was reading them all, and I was like becoming very educated on them. And I'm just like, okay, but what I was feeling didn't quite sit in with what I was learning with the other vestibular disorders that I was learning about. So I then felt like, well, what the hell have I got, if not all of these ones? And it wasn't until one day, and I'm getting really emotional talking about it too, it wasn't until, one day I came across an article about triple PD, and I read it, and all the symptoms and everything that article had written was spot on what I was experiencing. And I remember I was sitting outside trying to get some fresh air, hoping that it would help me feel a little bit better that day. So I was reading this article, sitting outside, and I literally just started crying my little eyes out in relief, because I felt like I finally had the answer I'd been looking for so long. And at this point, it had been months, so to live chronically dizzy and being scared of your own body and being scared of moving, walking around your house, it's to finally get an answer to why this is happening was an overwhelming experience and appreciation as well. So there was a lot of gratitude there. So I pretty much diagnosed myself. I self-diagnosed myself from that point with triple PD. No one else had answers for me. So from that moment on, once I'd kind of learned the characteristics of triple PD, basically what it took to recover from it, to start overcoming it, I set a plan in place for myself, a routine, and I stuck to it. So like I said, at this point, I was pretty bedridden. I wasn't traveling. I was terrified of being at home on my own. It was a very overwhelming experience altogether. So what I started doing, my recovery journey started from my window. Believe it or not, I would start VRT. I would do my VRT exercises. I would open up the blinds and I would look out my bedroom window. I lived in a double-story house at the time. I would open up the windows. I would look out the windows and I would do my VRT, my vestibular rehabilitation therapy, in front of the window looking outside. And that's literally where it began. I did, for me it was baby steps. I felt I needed to do baby steps. So I would get up in the morning, I would shower, I would eat, and I would start my VRT. And eventually once, sorry, I'm going to get ahead of myself here. So let me drag myself back. When I'd realized that the most important thing that you needed to do for triple PD was to move, and that the worst thing to do was to lay down, not only was I doing my VRT, but I was also forcing myself to get up and walk around the house and to move. So I was extremely fatigued. Let me tell you about my symptoms. I was constantly dizzy 24/7. So that feeling, if you've ever experienced the feeling of feeling lightheaded, like you're going to pass out, I literally had that feeling 24/7. I felt like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I was going to pass out. Sorry, except for when I was laying down. I was extremely fatigued. The fatigue was so debilitating. I had a lot of anxiety because my symptoms were causing anxiety. I was extremely nauseous. I had the feeling of needing to throw up constantly. And on top of that, because with triple PD, it's very hard to describe, but the world looks and feels so different. It looks scary. It feels scary. I can't tell you exactly what it is about it, but it's like, because naturally it's your brain. What triple PD is, it's your brain is stuck in a high alert state. So your brain is overreacting to normal stimulus. So when you're having that, when you're looking around and things look and feel different and scary, that's your brain sending those danger signals, constant danger signals. So for me, getting out of bed and really pushing myself to move was an extremely difficult and scary thing, given that I was constantly in a fear state. So going back to my therapy and my routine that I started with, I would get up and shower, I would eat something, and I would force myself to move. And yes, like I said, I was extremely fatigued. I would literally have to force myself. There were a lot of times I would be walking around the house crying that it was so bad, but I had to do it. So I would get up and move around, but I would also rest. So I wasn't pushing myself to the point where, I wanted to break myself. I did still want to be kind to myself. And I think that's very important in any type of recovery that you're going through. Self-kindness and self-care is extremely important. So I would limit my time to rest and move pretty much. And I was doing my VRT in front of the window. So once I was comfortable enough doing that, I was getting more confident with moving around the house and getting more confident with my VRT in front of the window. I then started walking around my backyard. And once I became comfortable with that, I moved it then to the front yard where there were a lot more visuals going on, a lot more noise. So I did that. So again, I would get up in the morning, I would shower, I would eat, I would do my VRT outside, and then I started walking up and down my street. So my street wasn't a very long street. You know, for the first maybe couple of weeks or so, I only got halfway and back. But that was enough for me because I'd barely left my house other than to go to like maybe a few appointments here and there, which caused extreme anxiety. But that is a different story. So I would walk up and down my street, and I would do that a couple of times, and that was it for me. And again, I would just keep trying to move throughout the day consistently, but also giving myself time to rest when I really felt like I needed it. And then eventually over time, I became confident enough to go to the end of the street. So while I was walking up and down the street, I started integrating my VRT as I was walking. So I would be walking, walking normally, but I would be doing those head movements and those eye gazes while I was walking. So I was integrating that. I found that really helpful. Look, a lot of times it's, particularly with VRT, because you are exposing yourself to movements that trigger dizziness. It's not a nice feeling. And, I can recall times where I was doing these exercises and especially when I was introducing new ones into my routine, it made me feel so sick and dizzy. But you got to do it. You got to keep at it. And then it got to the point where I was becoming more confident walking up and down my street. I was moving around a lot more at home, and I felt like, okay, I need to challenge myself a little bit more. So every weekend I would challenge myself, and I would go to shopping centers or supermarkets, malls, whatever you want to call them. I would go to these places and I would purposely expose myself to these busy, triggering environments and just take it all in. And what I found was the more I was doing that, the better I was becoming, the more I was adjusting to these environments again. And believe me, I would make a plan to go out on Saturday, and come Saturday morning, the extreme anxiety that I felt knowing that I was going to do this, I would be in the car on the way there. My partner would be taking me. He would take me, he would drive. And I would be crying, and then I would get out of the car and I would be walking through the car park almost in tears from fear and anxiety and from symptoms, because I was still experiencing them. But what I started realizing was, once I was there, and I get emotional again, once I was there and I was inside looking around and just taking my time and walking around, I slowly started, I guess, becoming comfortable in that environment again. So as much as my symptoms would still be there, I would still feel nauseous, really fatigued, I would still be dizzy. The anxiety, I guess, decreased quite a bit. So when I started realizing that, oh, okay, I can be in these environments and, be calm and nothing bad's going to happen. Like, I can be in these environments and feel dizzy and feel nauseous and feel these sensations, but still be okay. And I think when I started realizing that, when I really challenged that belief that something bad was going to happen, or I was going to die if something got too overwhelming, or if I felt something too strongly that I was going to die, I think when I started challenging that thought and I was proving that thought wrong, that's when a lot of change started happening, because I was then able to go to these triggering environments and expose myself to all of these this stimulus more frequently. And naturally, I was still quite fearful leading up to it. But the more I did it, the better I got. That's with anything, practice makes perfect, as they say. And one of the things that I actually did, which I found beneficial for myself, was I would go to these places and I would record myself. I would record my environment. So I would walk, say I was going to the shopping centre, I would get out of the car, I would walk through the car park, recording what I was looking at. I would record going in the doors of the shopping centres and walking around. And then I would make comments to myself like, I'm actually feeling good, like really like reassuring comments, because then if there were ever times where I was at home, because I could only really do it on weekends when my partner was home. So it was kind of like, almost like, oh, I got to start all over again 7 days later when I do it. So it was kind of like I could reflect back to my experience, watch it and go, you know what? I remember that. It wasn't that bad. So I think like recording myself, for me anyhow, that helped me quite a lot as well. So I'd been doing this exposure therapy for quite a number of months. I would say it was about 10 months, 11 months of consistent hard work. That is going from bedridden to be able to, push myself to go to the shops, say for an example. That was about 10, 11 months of consistent hard work and therapy. And it was my own therapy. I wasn't seeing a specialist or a doctor or a neurologist. Like I said, I'd researched quite significantly into vestibular disorders and now PPPD. So I was doing the therapy that I was reading about to help myself through this journey. So after about, 10, 11 months of doing this consistently, I realized that my dizziness subsided and I wasn't experiencing that lightheaded, dizzy feeling really anymore. That was like way in the background now. I would say it was even at like 5% in comparison to the 100% that I was feeling at when it first started. And but what I did notice is that while the dizziness and lightheaded feeling went, I feel like I started getting other symptoms. So I started getting a lot of head pressure, and the head pressure was extremely debilitating. So I recall, spending, hours in bed with ice pack after ice pack after ice pack, because the pain was just so debilitating. It was like my head was being crushed with a vice. It was so painful. So, and, I started reading that when there's a shift in symptoms, that's a good indication that, your body is going through that transition, that recovery process. So, I was very optimistic because my dizziness has, like I said, almost completely subsided. That was an extreme win for me, to get up and not think to myself, like my first thought in the morning when I got up was not, am I still dizzy? I didn't have that thought anymore. I would get up and I would just be like, what am I supposed to be doing today? Just like normal people. And so that was definitely a win for me. So for me, having this head pressure, I was just like, okay, this is something else that I'm just going to have to manage. And I still had the fatigue and the nausea, so that's fine. I could try and manage that daily as well. But as long as I didn't have that constant 24/7 dizziness, I felt like I could manage this now. So I was looking a little bit more into what could help with that, and I started taking, it's a vitamin called Migraine Care, and it's full of different B vitamins and magnesium. So I started taking that consistently every day, and I found that probably after about 3 weeks, maybe I'd say around the 3-week mark, my head pressure really subsided. So it got to the point where I was like, okay, this is fantastic. My dizziness is pretty much gone. My head pressure is disappearing. I'm still quite nauseous and I'm still a little bit fatigued. However, I was very iron deficient. I still am. I've always had an issue with low iron. So I think a lot of that could also be stemmed from my fatigue, could be, stemmed from low iron. But all in all, I was generally feeling okay. And sorry, also I need to backtrack for a moment, guys. I forgot to add, around the time that I started exposing myself to like busier environments, when I was actually forcing myself to get out of the house, I still didn't have a formal diagnosis. So because I was still experiencing symptoms after about 8 to 10 months, I really did, I guess, just want that reassurance that this is what I was dealing with. So, because I'd been working so hard at it every day for so long, I just wanted that reassurance. So I saw a dizzy specialist who is in Melbourne, and when I went there, I didn't tell him, I only talked to him about my experience. I didn't prompt him in any way. I didn't give him any indication of what I thought I have or what I thought I'd been dealing with. I literally just went there, sat down, told him my symptoms, what I'd been experiencing. He did a couple of tests on me, and he formally then diagnosed me with vestibular migraine and PPPD. So for me, again, that was another relief point where it's okay, yes, I was right. What I had been doing for the last X amount of months, is the right thing for me. And look, it's not that I didn't have faith or trust myself, because what I was doing was working. I could see that, but there was still, I guess, that there was still something in me that wanted that official diagnosis of, yes, this is what it is, this is what you're dealing with, and this is how you can overcome it. So he recommended medication to me, as my neurologist did. And look, I tried medication for about 4 weeks with my neurologist. This was my early stages. It didn't agree with me, and from then on, I didn't want to take medication. So when this specialist recommended medications to me, I was like, you know what? No. I've been doing quite well without medication. I'd like to sort of keep pursuing that holistic healing kind of channel, so that kind of route. So that was great. I got my formal diagnosis and I went about my day. And I just continued to do what I was doing. Like I said, I continued to challenge my symptoms, exposing myself to busy and triggering environments. I was managing my symptoms as they came, or if, there was, I guess you could say, if the symptoms were moving around or changing in any way, I was kind of just dealing with them as they came. There were times where I had flare-ups, And I want people to know that, flare-ups don't mean that you're not getting better. It's just a part of the recovery process. What I have learned that recovery certainly is not linear. So for example, I would feel really good and I would feel like things are finally becoming under control and manageable. And then I would get sick with a virus, and I used to get sick a lot. I don't know if it was all the stress that I was enduring. I had such a weak immune system, but I used to get sick a lot. And because I would also spend a lot of time in bed, I was bedridden for the most cases when I got sick with colds and flus and viruses. So I wasn't moving. So when I, was finished with my cold or flu or virus, my symptoms would come back. And it's the same with whenever I had my period as well. So I started noticing a pattern the days leading up to my period, and while I had my period, I was extremely dizzy, and I would be dizzy for days, maybe even up to a week and a half, and then I would have a little bit of a break in between. And then, that dizziness and those symptoms would flare up again. But I also noticed with that, over time, it just decreased. So the severity decreased, not the days, but the severity. So, leading up to my period, I would still have symptoms, but they weren't as bad as what they were 3 months ago. And then 3 months after that, okay, I was still getting symptoms, but they weren't as bad as 3 months ago. So, and then it just got to a point now where I would have my period and I don't really get symptoms. So that's what I've noticed in my experience with myself anyhow. Other triggers for me, and that still sort of applies today, stress is a massive trigger, especially if it's long-term stress, little stresses here throughout the day, or if you're having a couple of stressful days, like that's generally tolerable. But if you're going through a stressful period where it's lasting, and I'm just going by my experience, where it's lasting more than a few days or a week or, more, then that can definitely flare up symptoms. And honestly, I'm not sure if that's the PPPD or the vestibular migraine, because I do have both of them. I would put it down to vestibular migraine, because PPPD is generally a consistent dizziness that lasts more than 3 months. So I don't have that anymore. So I guess I would put it down to my vestibular migraine. And also just a bit of background for you too. Bit of background knowledge. My vestibular migraine is genetic. Apparently it's common for it to run in the females of the family. So I know that my nan suffered greatly with migraines, but actual migraines. And because, going back then to when she was a bit younger and suffering through this, people wouldn't even think of, vestibular migraine wasn't a thing. So she could very well have been experiencing this and not even known it. My mum occasionally has experienced vestibular migraine episodes, but to no degree to what I have. And my sister, again, she was diagnosed with vestibular migraine, also experiencing vestibular migraine episodes, but she did not end up with PPPD, so she was very lucky in that regards. But I think for me personally, it's something that I might have to manage on an ongoing basis, because it is genetic. And look, I can remember, being 11 years old in primary school and getting throbbing migraines. And like, I don't think that's normal. I don't know if that's normal. I've never really met anyone else that used to get such bad migraines from, when they were a young child. And I know with my eldest daughter, she's only 14. She's been getting, headaches for a few years now. She gets them. And I noticed she gets them sort of the way I got them as well when I was younger. So it could just be inevitable that she would end up with vestibular migraine as she gets older. So I don't think this is something that I can necessarily fully overcome or recover from. I think it's something that I am just going to have to manage now, I guess for the rest of my days. But thankfully it's not ongoing the way it was with triple PD, because that condition, oh my God, is so debilitating. It's horrible. It is a horrible condition. Vestibular migraine, yes, it comes in episodes, so that can be manageable, and you can also manage it knowing, how to, I guess, to prevent your triggers. Not prevent your triggers, but to stay away from your triggers. Like stress. Stress is a big trigger, so you would try to, when it comes to when you're going through certain difficult periods or challenges in your life, that to be a little bit more aware of yourself and looking after yourself, which isn't a bad thing. Having something like this happen to you it's like your body's saying to you, pay attention to me. You got to start doing well for yourself. Do better. So, that alarm's not necessarily the worst thing. So it does keep you on track. And that's something to appreciate, because we all tend to forget to look after ourselves. Everybody lives busy lives, and we all have other people, or, we've all got other people and animals and work to look after, and we tend to forget about ourselves. So it's not the worst thing to be reminded of, making time for self-care. But otherwise, I guess that is my experience. It is now 3 years later almost exactly 3 years later from when I initially started having those mini episodes, I suppose you could call it. And, I am working full time. I work from home, which is so convenient. It's great, especially when I do have flare-ups like the vestibular migraine episodes. It is great, and my workplace is so supportive, so I am lucky in that way. But I sit at at 3 computer screens actually all day, so I am pretty much living the way I was living. I still feel like I have a little bit of lingering anxiety from those days. It's not something I really dealt with on a cognitive level. It's probably something that it's something that I have been trying to but something that I've been trying to work with, because I am very aware that I still show signs of anxiety, and there are some things that I am hesitant about and that I do avoid. And not for the cause that I get symptoms, but simply because I guess that fear is still ingrained in me, because I lived that way for so long and I battled so hard that it was just, it was conditioned in me in some way. So that is something I'm still working on. Actually, before we move on to the closing of this episode, I also wanted to talk about the other therapies that I did that helped me through my journey. And one of them, and it's something that I've highly recommended, I've always recommended it in my group on Facebook, is somatic tracking. And somatic tracking gives you the ability to coexist with your symptoms and all of those scary sensations without fearing them. And I guess one of the most significant things, particularly at the start of your recovery journey, one of the most significant things that make that big difference is being able to coexist with your symptoms and not have them running your life, not fearing them, because it's very easy to get into a fear symptom cycle. It's extremely common to fall into a fear symptom cycle. So somatic tracking is, I guess, a therapy that works really well to help you sit with your symptoms and let them exist within you without fearing them. And that is something that I used to practice almost daily, I can tell you. And sometimes it was multiple times a day. Sometimes I would sit there for 40 minutes having a somatic tracking experience. Other times it might only be 15 minutes. It sort of depended on the day, what I was experiencing that day and the severity of my symptoms. So somatic tracking, if you're unfamiliar with it, I highly recommend looking that up and checking it out. I definitely want to do an episode on that because I love it. It means so much to me. It's helped me so much. So it's something that I definitely want to discuss more in detail. Exposure therapy. Naturally, I did speak a lot about exposure therapy in my journey. So again, that's exposing yourself to your triggers, and naturally it's going to make you dizzy, but hey, that's generally the purpose of it because you're trying to get your brain to readjust to normal stimulus again. So exposure therapy is another one. Meditation is another one, and relaxation. So again, you're dealing with a brain that is in a high alert state. And so one of the things that are going to help that process in calming it down is obviously taking the time to rest your mind, rest your body, and really get out of your thoughts. And I find in my experience, I was in my head a hell of a lot. And being in your head too much, because you're so focused on what goes on within, your dizziness, what's this feeling? Is this feeling dangerous? Is it getting worse? Kind of a thing. You're so focused on what's going on within. So meditation and those kind of relaxation exercises really do benefit. I sort of put them in the somatic tracking category because it's sort of working with it, it's sort of similar the way I sort of worked with it. And I guess one of the other things that I did was trying to desensitize myself from things that I considered triggers as well. And it's something that I'm still working with today. So for an example, music was one of the things that I really thoroughly enjoyed. I love music, and I was a dancer when I was younger, and as I got older I loved the clubbing and the pub days, and I loved music, I loved dancing, and music was something that I felt I couldn't bear when I was having my experience. So today even I try to even just to put the music on, start low, and then sort of build up from there. and see how I'm feeling. Building up from how much stress you're able to tolerate as well. And I'm not saying that, you should continuously allow stressful situations to happen or not to manage it, but as in, there's a very big difference of how much I was able to tolerate 2 years ago to what I'm able to tolerate today. So I know now, when I get to a certain point, or if I've had ongoing stress for a couple of days and I start feeling a particular way, I'm like, oh, okay, this is my body saying, okay, you need to take a step back and you need to do some self-care, and you need to check what's going on with yourself and your surroundings. So those sorts of being able to desensitize yourself from triggers, I think, is also very significant, because you don't want to have to avoid things your whole life. It's not a way to live. So I think starting small, if that's what you need to do to certain things to desensitize yourself, so then you can start being able to live that full life that you were living before that you miss so much. And I guess lastly, I wanted to add that in my experience, and going by, a lot of people that I've connected with over the last couple of years, it's my belief that the first perhaps 12 months of PPPD can be the worst. I believe that's like the thick of it. And if you're working with your symptoms within that first 12 months, and you're putting strategies into place to, try and get to a certain point of recovery, I think it's a lot easier for people to be able to overcome it. And I'm not saying that people who have been experiencing it for longer than a year or two won't ever. All I'm saying is that it's my belief that the first 12 months is the thick of it, and the earlier that you start working with it, it's my belief that it is the benefit of, it will become your benefit working with it earlier on. And that's all we really have time for today, everyone. I really appreciate the support and you dropping into my channel and listening to my experience. If you have any questions, please, you're more than welcome to send me a message with a question, and I am happy to answer any questions in my next episode. But otherwise, I thank you again for your support and for listening, and I really hope to catch you in the next episode. But also, I really hope that you found any of the information in this episode helpful in any way. I hope it's in some way inspired you a little bit through your journey. Thanks, everyone.